back here later.
Yeah.
We'll get a picture.
Yeah, we'll get it later.
Let's move on and see if we can find some other stuff.
Who's got the data sheet?
I have the data sheet.
Go ahead.
5.
5 red light vision. Okay.
We're on the San Mateo County coast today because of a very special day. It's BioBlitz. What is BioBlitz? We'll find out on this episode of Pacific Currents. In 2016, the National Park Service will celebrate its 100th anniversary. In keeping with this, the National Geographic Society has organized a BioBlitz. Every year through 2016, the National Geographic Society is sponsoring a BioBlitz in a national park. And this year, it's the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So what is BioBlitz? Well, basically, it's a survey of all living organisms in a specific area. For example, all the animals, plants, microorganisms, fungi, that are in a particular area, and this is to go into a national survey for the national park system so they know what's in a particular area. Who is doing this survey? Well, it's scientists, rangers, teachers, and even families who have volunteered to take part in this huge undertaking. It's taking place from Muir Woods to Rancho Corral de Tierra to the south. Over 300 scientists have volunteered and at least that many volunteers. We're here in the studio with Professor Carlos Davidson, who's a professor at San Francisco State University. He's in the Environmental Studies Department, and I'd like to welcome you very much to our studio. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
And could you tell us something about environmental studies, what that's all about?
Yeah, environmental studies is a combination of sciences to understand the scientific underpinning of environmental problems, but also social sciences, politics, economics, sociology, to understand why does human society create these problems in the first place, and most importantly, what can be done to change society to address these problems.
Very timely, and this is a fairly new source of study at the university, is that correct?
It's now getting old. The first program dates to around 1970 in the U.S., so we're now 40 years old, but as far as disciplines go, economics traces its back, hundreds of years, so
sure.
we are a relatively new discipline.
Could you tell me what your background is in biology?
Yeah. I actually have a good background for environmental studies. I used to be an economist. I studied labor economics. And then I completely switched and got my PhD in ecology. And I study disappearance of amphibians in California and a little bit globally. But I'm interested in human society and amphibians and biology.
Well, and this is very timely because out along the coast we have the red-legged frog. And I understand that's one of your specialties.
Yep.
Because that's something we do talk about here in Pacifica a lot. So we went to Mori Point. We took our mobile camera with us to the entrance to BioBlitz at Mori Point, and we met Candace. And Candace was a great spokesman for what they were doing that day. So let's go see Candace.
Hi everybody, welcome to BioBlitz. We are here at the Mori Point station, checking volunteers in at the Moose Lodge. Hi, I'm Candace. I am the volunteer lead at Mori Point for BioBlitz. We've been here all day working with community members, local schools, and scientists, and we'll be here tomorrow as well, doing various walks, and we hope you can come down and join us.
Professor, could you tell us something about BioBlitz? I know that it was organized by the National Geographic Society in conjunction with the national parks, And it involved a lot of people, so perhaps you could tell us the people who were involved and what they were actually doing out there.
A BioBlitz is an intensive survey conducted over usually a short, very specific period of time. So in this case, it was 24 hours, and it was lots of scientists, hundreds of scientists coming in with specialties in all kinds of different things. Scientists specialize in plants, in amphibians, in birds, in mosses, so hundreds of scientists with different specialties to cover all the different organisms that are out there. And then the main idea is during that short period of time for scientists to go out with members of the public, with citizens, and to try to look and find as many different species and count how many species they're seeing in that period of time to give you a count of all the different organisms that are out of place.
So it's like a photograph of a particular time and day, but it gives you kind of a sense of what's going on in the whole park.
Yeah, like a photograph that you could zoom in and look, oh, look at that plant there, that's a such and such species. And so we would go out, and sometimes as scientists we could identify them on the spot, and they had those little phones hooked into an application that recorded on a computer, and they could just, okay, this is a such and such plant species, and they would send in the location, the coordinates, and the time, and who was observing it. And other times we would find something, we'd go, none of us know what, particularly there, we don't know what this is, but we'll record it, we'll take some pictures, possibly take a sample, and then later on some scientists would identify it, and then that would also go into the database.
Now this BioBlitz took place in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and it started at Muir Woods, is that correct?
Yeah.
And extended southward?
All the way through San Francisco, Crissy Field, the Presidio, then into San Mateo County, Mori Point, Milagro Ridge, and then down south to the newest section of GGNRA, Rancho Corral de Tierra.
And of course, we couldn't hit all those spots. We only went to Mori Point, but the same kind of thing was happening everywhere. We had the scientists and the volunteers working together.
Same activities.
Okay. And this wasn't the only BioBlitz. There have been others?
Yeah, I think one a year and organized by the National Park Service. So there was one in Florida, in Biscayne. There was one in Rocky Mountain National Park, and then next year at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. I'm hoping they'll fly me out there.
Well, that would be great, yes.
Only kidding.
Do you need any help? We're here at the data center, which is collecting all the information from the survey teams, and we're going to find out what they do with the data. So when the survey people come in here, what do you actually do with that information?
Most folks out there are using the iNaturalist app to collect data in the field, but those folks who don't have an iPhone or smartphone or aren't comfortable, we actually take their data sheets, which we have up there, and we come in, we'll scan them, we'll go over them with the scientist, make sure everything's accurate, and then we'll collect their photographs if they have any, and their sound, audio.
Oh, photographs too.
Photographs too. And then we'll go ahead and log into iNaturalist and enter the data from here. It's a way that folks can go out and observe different species, plants, animals, and they can upload it and get help from other folks if they can't identify it themselves. So it's a repository of things that people saw here, and in this case, in 24 hours, that's what the BioBlitz is. Although
I understand this iNaturalist device or application can be used throughout the year, so people leading hikes, people who are doing field research can do this all year long, and it keeps going into this big database, right?
That's right, and folks can form different groups of interest. If they're interested in amphibians, they can form a group, and then you can log in and track things. I think there's a bird application for San Mateo County.
Wow.
There's a group that the Audubon Society is helping with. So yeah, it's a year-round application that folks can use.
That's terrific. And what was the Conservancy's role in this project?
The Conservancy's role was recruiting lovely volunteers to help the scientists as inventory docents and also volunteers to help in the data center, and also volunteers just to help with check-in and interact with the public. So that was the Conservancy's main role. And also at the Christie Field Center, the Conservancy was responsible for staging the festival itself.
And much of that festival is going to take place tomorrow, is that correct?
Yes, today and tomorrow, and I believe the closing ceremony tomorrow is at 3:30.
Sounds right.
Where Frank Dean, he's the park superintendent, he's going to announce how many total species were observed in the 24-hour period. And he's also going to reveal the next park site for BioBlitz 2015.
Wonderful. And this is going to continue on with other parks then?
Yes. I believe until 2016, when NPS celebrates their centennial.
Yes.
Right. So there's two more parks to go.
And what does a park do with this information once they collect it all? Is it to give everyone an idea of the health of the environment, or just to know the numbers of species, or what would you say is the goal?
Well, I think in this case, a lot of the species, most of these species have probably already been identified. We'll have to see how many new species they find.
Oh.
And it's not about collecting abundance and quantity of the species, it's just a snapshot, for biodiversity. So maybe just a starting point, and then years down the road, if they do it again, they can see how it compares, what kind of species.
Although I would imagine this is sort of a window on how healthy an environment is by the number of species that are there and how they're interacting with one another.
It's a snapshot. It's helpful, but it's again, they're not collecting abundance of quantity of species and range and all that. It's just.
So it's not like a real big scientific study. It's more of, as you say, a picture of what's going on in that particular area.
Yeah, that's right.
If I may continue on with that question,
Sure.
I think for the scientists, we have some expert-only inventories from NPS and the Conservancy, and as well as independent scientists who are going out on their own to try to find things that we may have not discovered yet in the park. And for the public and for the youth, I think one of the main goals of BioBlitz is to just encourage going out, observing, and being able to be a scientist for the day. So it's more about showing the public that, hey, you don't have to have a degree to be able to go out and observe nature in your own backyard.
That's one of the best things about it. And I noticed when we were out in the field, we had some families out there with kids, and they were very much involved in the survey, and it's great to see that families are working with scientists directly. That's one of the best benefits of the whole day, I think. You saw how all that data was collected into these computers, and then eventually it was compiled by a group of people who now put it on the website, which you can go see. So you can actually see the results of this whole event. And some of the things I learned was that there were 374 scientists involved, thousands of volunteers involved, including 2,700 school kids. There were 2,304 species identified within the park limits. 80 species were new to the park, and 15 species were identified as threatened. Which leads me to ask you, Professor, this information must be very valuable to you, and what do you do with these, with all this data?
The data is valuable, both to scientists and to park managers. So some of it just immediately, okay, we now know that there's a population of this rare plant at this location, so that will be taken account of in our planning. Like, okay, maybe that's now a bad location for a trail. and maybe we'll move that trail
yeah.
and route it just little ways away, but that protects that rare plant population. Some of the data has really immediate management use like that. And then more long-term, scientists can use the data in a bunch of different ways. One is population trends. So there was not just what species were seen, but how many and how much effort was put into finding them. If you repeat the survey, let's say 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or who knows, 50 years from now, and you get some really different numbers. Some organism that was hardly seen this time was seen once or twice, and let's say 50 years from now, it's very abundant. Having that comparison lets you know, okay, something has changed, and the numbers are really going up for this organism. And conversely, maybe they're really going down, and that would let you know, okay, maybe something's not going well in the management of the park, and for some reason this particular organism is not doing well in the park, and then that feeds back to management. Okay, maybe we need to do something differently in terms of how we're managing the park to ensure that this organism that historically has been there continues into the future.
And then it becomes a political question too, because if pollution, for example, is one of the factors involved, and then it becomes something the politicians have to deal with, and the public too, and their voting choices.
Yep. All this comes back to what do we want in the future, and some of it will be related to documenting and understanding those things that maybe we already know are going on, but you need to be able to document it and show it and to see how extensive it is, and or maybe the good news. Okay, we did a bunch of restoration work out at Mori Point, and we've planted a bunch of plants that used to be there. And maybe 10 years we go do a survey, and we say, wow, this thing that used to be pretty rare out there that we knew previously was probably pretty abundant before the place got overused in some bad ways. And look, now it's back. Really satisfying to see, okay, the things that we've been doing to conserve a place are working, and we can document it that way.
And I have to say this is near and dear to those of us along the coast, because there are a lot of people involved in plant restoration. For example, Oceana School here in Pacifica is raising plants, specifically native plants, so they can be planted within the GGNRA. And so the kids are involved in that, and it's great to see that they're part of this whole big picture.
Yeah, and think how satisfying it will be for some of them to, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, when some survey says, some of those plants that they helped reestablish are now have healthy, big populations in that location.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Also, another, in some ways, it is hard to know in the future how we will use this data. So, a lot of my own research on amphibian declines is based upon historic records, many of them, early 1900s, some back to the 1800s, of where particular species used to be in California. So we have data on red-legged frogs across the whole state. So much of that data was collected, a long time ago, and people didn't foresee that amphibians would be disappearing at all. But now that they are, that data is really useful to be able to say, oh, they historically were in this valley, and now we can go back and look and know they're not there anymore. That documents a decline. If we didn't have that historic data point, we wouldn't know. They're not here now. Were they ever here? No way to know. So this data that we have now, we don't know how it will be used, but it will help say, okay, this species was present at this location at this time, and that may be really helpful to understand some sort of issue in the future.
So 50 years from now, people will be thanking us for doing this project.
Yes. In the same way that as scientists, we thank people that collected some of this data, not so intensively, but still the documents, the data that they collected, a long time ago is incredibly valuable now.
In fact, two of the scientists we found at Mori Point were down there in the frog pond. So now you'll get a chance to meet them as we go back to Mori Point.
If we find something during a survey that we aren't familiar with, which is usually a plant
or an invertebrate,
we can take a photo of it and upload it to iNaturalist, and then the community that is involved in iNaturalist will look at the photo and identify it for us.
The trails are for the people and the dogs, and the ponds are for the snakes and the frogs.
Excellent.
Well, I'm Mandy. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I work at a consulting firm called URS, and also the president of the Bay Area chapter of the Wildlife Society.
I'm Tammy, and I'm also a wildlife biologist, and I also work at URS. And we're just out here helping out with the GGNRA National Geographic BioBlitz, surveying Mori Point and the ponds for San Francisco garter snakes and California red-legged frogs.
We do a lot of voluntary work in our free time to just survey. We like using iNaturalist. You know, we kind of do these passion projects, I guess, on the weekends where we go out and collect information and look for stuff that we think is cool. But from a scientific perspective, it's also valuable information. So we're kind of having fun and collecting data at the same time.
Well, iNaturalist is a database accessible to the public, and then wildlife biologists also have our own state-run database that we use both for scientific purposes and also for consulting. So some of the data that we collect feed into both systems. iNaturalist is more fun since you can deal with the general public, and it's a way to access a lot of data from people who aren't professional biologists as well. So
the Wildlife Society is a professional organization for wildlife biologists. It's an international organization, but it has also regional sections and chapters, and so there's a chapter here in the Bay Area. So we try to go on trips once a month, and we try to engage the public as well, and we do outreach whenever we can.
So, Professor, we actually met you at Mori Point, and you were doing a count of the red-legged frog. I understand you're an expert in the red-legged frog, and we know that this is a threatened species along the coast. We hear that a lot. Could you tell us what you've been finding in your studies of this particular animal?
I've been looking at the patterns of disappearance of the red-legged frog, and it's disappeared from about 70% of its range.
Wow. In
California. And really interesting, it's disappeared from many places in Southern California that you go back, and I've been back to many of those locations, again, using historic data. So someone who took the time 50, 100 years ago to say, okay, I'm at this location, here's a red-legged frog that I've collected. And going back to those sites, many of them look gorgeous. They're pristine still, there's no frogs. Just that tells us one thing, early on in the kind of trying to understand the disappearance of frogs, people said, well, it's California, lots of places have been paved over, there's lots of habitat alteration, and right away you could go back to some of these sites and say, well, no, this place looks gorgeous. So it's something more subtle that's happening than just habitat destruction.
Yeah, it makes me think of that quotation by Paul Ehrlich. It takes a lot of rivets to hold the wing on the plane, and if you take enough of those rivets out, the wing's going to fall off. And it seems to me that if we keep having these species disappear, it's going to affect the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, it's interesting with the metaphors. So one is the Ehrlich metaphor of kind of the plane crashes when a particular rivet, the tipping point, the breaking point. I myself like more a metaphor of a tapestry, and you could think of each of the species as a thread in the tapestry, and you pull a thread out, and there's no kind of overall crash. But you pull threads out and it gets less and less pretty, it gets threadbare. Maybe you get some small local tears, but it's not it's flying, it crashes thing. And it's more what we see in the world. we lose species and we lose some of the beauty, we lose some of the function of ecosystems. Maybe there isn't going to be a cliff where it all crashes and we say, oh well, that species, that was the tipping point. But each one does make a difference even without a crash. You pull that thread out of the beautiful rug and it doesn't look as beautiful and it doesn't function as well.
I like that idea, and it also makes me think that in practical terms, if you are losing enough amphibians, you're going to have less, which are good predators of, say, mosquito larvae, then eventually you're going to have more mosquitoes, which definitely has an impact on the human population. So even in practical terms, even though we may not see the importance in a small way, in a larger way, these species are extremely important. These are the canaries in the mine. They're telling us something. So another person we met on our travels on Mori Point was Kip Kaiser, who is from the San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Abatement District, and she had some things to say about the importance of mosquito control.
We're setting some adult mosquito traps using carbon dioxide as a lure, and we're sampling the water out here in the willows and the mitigation ponds, looking for mosquito larvae to see what different species are out here for the BioBlitz. Hi, I'm Kim Kaiser. I work for San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Control District. I'm a vector biologist. I'm out here today collecting adult and larval mosquito samples, and we have found several species and have a diverse sample right here.
You may be wondering what you could do to be part of this whole process of protecting the environment. So I know the Parks Conservancy has some programs going on that you know about, Professor?
Yeah, just even right on the coast, the Conservancy works with the GGNRA and works with volunteers. So they do habitat restoration, and you can go to their website and look up, and this Saturday in April they're doing habitat restoration at Mori Point, and this other one they're doing it at some other location. So you can do that sort of thing. Up in Marin County, I think they're doing some creek restoration work you can look into.
Yes.
So there's all kinds of places where volunteers are needed for kind of on the ground sort of work. If you're interested in this kind of, I see a species and I want to report it, you can get iNaturalist on your mobile phone. It's I think a free app, and you can report things.
So they can get a continuous stream of data, which again helps scientists with getting these patterns in.
Citizen scientists, and you take a picture and you send it in, and someone, then it gets referred off to some scientists to check the identification, and then it all gets compiled. Yeah, and the same thing if you're really interested in birds, there's something called eBird. For all other organisms, use iNaturalist, but for birds, there's something called eBird, and you can go look that up on the web and start reporting the birds you see in your backyard.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's actually now some papers out, published in scientific journals, that are based on the backyard bird reporting of people using eBird.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's really neat. So they've compiled, thousands and thousands of records of what people see in their backyard, and then scientists have taken that and done some analysis, and we can see this sort of trend just based on that data.
Well, I know here in San Mateo County we also have a need for volunteers. The county parks needs volunteers for trail maintenance. The new Devil's Slide has been open, and they need ambassadors, as they call them, to walk the trail there. The state parks along San Mateo County coast can always use volunteers for beach cleanup and assist the rangers there. And of course, if you want to be a docent at Año Nuevo, that's always a great thing to do. So there's plenty of opportunities for people to get involved in this whole idea of helping the environment in some way, or teaching people about the environment.
Yep, and being kind of hands-on, working with scientists, working with the Park Service.
Professor Davidson, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I hope that you keep up the good work in the world of science. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. This is a show that can be seen on Pacific Current's channel on YouTube. Anytime you want to see one of our shows, that's where you can find us. So we hope that you'll join us again for our next show, and thanks very much for joining us. Good night.